You are listening to Stribling's New York. I am your host, Rob Taub, on 710 WOR AM Radio 710 on your digital dial, an iHeartMedia company. I'm joined in the studio along with my producer, Tony Simone, by Geoff Martell, who's the director of data and data at Stribling Associates.
If you're from New York, you say data.
Or if you're from the Bronx, you say dater. Dater.
Yeah.
Data.
Well, data's important.
He's a good dater. Geoff, welcome. What's
Thanks.
going on?
Good afternoon.
Fill me in.
Well, the New York market is a little bit confusing right now. What I've heard from brokers on the ground is that things are a little bit all over the place. In terms of the statistics, average prices are up a little bit, as we should expect from the seasonal fluctuations in the market, certainly up from February and March. Supply is at about 4,876 units, which is up 9.2% from 1 month ago.
Is that the 5 boroughs or Manhattan?
That is Manhattan. Days on market is 49 days, and that's the median. It's up 6.5% from 1 year ago. So that means that things are sitting on the market a little bit longer. Also, contracts signed in March were about 940, which is up seasonally, but down 25% from 1 year ago as well. So
now, is that under 3 million, the sitting?
That is
in general
for everything in the market.
Wow.
So everything from 0 to over 50 million.
I'm curious about the stock market. Do you compare and contrast along with the market? Because we just had Anthony Scaramucci on from Skybridge Capital last week, and I was looking at some information on the market, which is climbing and climbing and climbing. So is there going to be a point where people remain insanely greedy, or there are others who are a little more conservative and are going to yank money out of the stock market and throw it into other investments? And do you look at that?
You know, I do look at it. Generally, the stock market seems to, or real estate rather, seems to follow the stock market for the most part. Not completely, but there's a general investment trend when people are buying in the stock market. They're also, confident in real estate, but there are always going to be those people who are less confident in real estate than others, just like the stock market as well. And I think one thing is for certain is that when you see fluctuations, certainly in the foreign market, what you often see is people in those foreign markets, whether it's China or Japan, South America, et cetera, moving their capital, moving their investments into the United States as well as into U.S. real estate because it's a safe investment and has been for the past 15 years.
Is it true there's been a pullback of foreign investors in New York? I feel like I've heard brokers say that. I don't know if it's anecdotal or...
I think it's mostly anecdotal. I think it's a little bit too early right now to tell whether there's been a full pullback. I mean, in terms of the Q1 data, we're not quite far enough out, I think, to really have a good picture of what's happening. I think there's been a little bit of a slowdown, but in general, I think people are still investing in New York real estate.
I mean, we're a non-political show, but just on the periphery, it's been a crazy presidential election. If I was a foreign investor, you may want to take a pause for a little bit, see what happens, right? But then again,
that is a factor, and it is something whether you're not necessarily being political, but you're going to say, what could happen in the next 2 years?
Right.
So.
But our economy is still fundamentally sound. It's not
exactly. The economy is fundamentally sound, and whether Trump's elected or whether Hillary is elected or whether Bernie's elected, you're probably still going to see people putting their money in the United States because, hey, it's been a relatively stable market for
New York.
For the past, in New York, absolutely, for the past 30 years.
I read in Curbed, I think it was this morning, that in the Bronx and Staten Island, buyers are flocking there.
Buyers are flocking to the Bronx, to Staten Island, and the reason is because, fundamentally, the
affordability.
Affordability, absolutely. I mean, affordability. I think out of all the issues across the United States, not just in New York, not just in San Francisco or the other prime markets in the U.S., L.A. and Miami in particular, you're seeing the issue as an affordability issue. So people are moving their investments to the Bronx, and many of them are still keeping their investments, obviously, in Manhattan, but people are going to the Bronx because it's affordable to live there, especially the people who, are coming out of college or have first or second jobs who aren't making over $250,000 or $300,000 a year. They say, well, I can afford to live in New York City, but it's got to be in the Bronx.
Well, it's funny.
I love the Bronx.
Last week we talked to someone about affordable housing on the show, but it's affordable housing is like something where a studio is not $1 million, which is what you're talking about now in the West Village. You could buy a studio and have to pay a mansion tax.
That's absolutely right. And I think that what's really interesting is when I take a step back from looking at the New York market, and of course I worked in the San Francisco market before this, which is arguably, some people want to say it's more expensive than New York, but on the price per square foot basis, it's not quite there yet. But either way, you have the two most expensive markets in America, and you say, well, you have 326 square foot studios in San Francisco's Hayes Valley neighborhood selling for $500,000, and all of a sudden people are calling that affordable. All of a sudden people are calling apartments in New York between $1 and $3 million really affordable apartments that move really quickly off the line. And you say, something's a little bit not out of whack there, but when you're trying to find affordability for something that's over $1 million, then putting into comparison, you have houses going for $50,000 in Tulsa and Dallas, Texas. So affordability is definitely an issue, I think, which could use a little bit more defining.
I mean, it's more than a supply and demand, right? It's the cost of construction in New York City.
Yeah, absolutely.
Land is expensive. There aren't a million empty lots.
It's interesting. It's definitely construction costs. It's definitely the cost of building materials and associated costs. It's funny. My father worked with Donald Trump on the building of Woolman Rink many years back, and he worked with him for about 9 years. And my father always has this story where he says, and this is a little bit tangential, he was having lunch with Donald Trump one day in the World Trade Center, and Donald Trump said, "Do you know what the largest impediment to building in New York City is?" And my father said, "Well, the cost of buying materials." And Donald Trump was like, "No, it's traffic. It's finding parking in New York City, and
that makes sense.
And the cost for to hold a parking spot or to cut off a street in New York is extremely expensive on a per hour basis. So when you say it's
get rid
15,
of the street markets,
yeah,
get rid of the.
I was just walking down the street the other day and looking at an office
I'm
building.
Get in trouble for that.
Where they were putting new HVAC units on the roof of a building, and they had to close a major street, to get a crane, and they had to put that up. And I'm sure just getting the permits and the various problems you have to go through with the city agencies takes forever to do that. I was going to say who you have to pay off. But.
Also, don't forget that we're a city of towns, right? Neighborhoods. Right. Every neighborhood kind of wants to keep their character up against the fact that we need housing, right? Yeah. My partner, boyfriend, fiance, he goes by different titles, always is like, why don't we just build up and denser like Hong Kong? Why do we have this housing problem? Well, some folks don't want their views blocked, light blocked.
That's true.
Right? The West Village is characteristically low.
Interestingly, that's not going to solve the affordability problem. New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, they've all built up, and some more than others, especially Hong Kong. And they say, well, Hong Kong still has an average price per square foot that's still higher than New York. So, if you build, people are just going to come.
It's true, and it's kind of a crazy thing when a buyer says to a real estate broker, "Can you promise me nobody's going to build here?" "Oh, sure." Your view will never be obstructed.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is when you look at some of this data, you say, well, okay, the average apartment's been on the market for 49 days, or it's been a median of 49 days that the apartment was on the market. Well, you say, and people think the market's slowing down, especially the market above 5 million. And you say, well, if you bring apartments online, into the market that are between $500,000 and $800,000, well, guess what? That those median days is going to drop significantly, right? Those apartments are going to fly off the market in 2 or 3 days.
How many difficult sellers does it take to affect the data? Seriously, when you get like some crazy person that insists on overpricing their place, and that's why I love about Street Easy or the various programs that are available. It's like on the market 472 days. I wonder why.
It just takes a few to skew the data, which is generally why when you're going through this data, you take note of that, and you take note of overpriced apartments that have been sitting for a long time, but you generally have to scoop those out as an outlier and say, well, everything else is sitting on the market for X however many days. You have to sort of remove the outlier to get an accurate picture of what's happening.
This is an interesting business. It's not like the stock market. If if Apple is selling for X number of dollars and you want to
maybe not anymore.
Yeah, right. Well, I think it was $240 a share last year, but pick whatever stock you want, and it's selling for an amount. That's the amount that you're going to have to sell it for.
Well, you know what I think is interesting is when you're talking about new development, you have these developers who have spent a huge amount of money on the land alone,
sure,
and therefore they have
huge windows.
In order to underwrite their performers, they were underwritten at a certain at a certain amount per apartment, and now the market's seeing that you can't necessarily get $13 million, $14 million.
What are they doing?
$120 million for a particular apartment, and instead of lowering the price, the developer will say, "Well, we're going to offer an incentive instead."
What's an incentive?
Well, an incentive, could be offered to, the buyer or the broker, right? So 4% commission or something like that, just to bring people in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Developers don't want to lower their prices because, they have to, ultimately, they, like everyone else, is beholden to some master, and, their master is the investors. And I don't want to get too political and
well, haven't some of these developers divided up their apartments to rent them as luxury temporary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
while they're waiting for the buyer.
Look at what happened in 157. Billionaires row 57. What?
With that view.
With that, the
$20 million view.
Well, it's a $20 million view that I could get for $10,000 somewhere else in the country. So,
but you won't be in New York City.
No,
you move to Staten Island and get that lovely view.
You get that
Manhattan.
view.
Exactly.
Hey, nothing wrong with Staten Island, but it's not the view.
I was born there. I'm not trashing it.
Yeah. The 5-borough city.
I just look. I'm going to wrap this segment up. I
we've been
think that a little test you can do is I was at Carnegie Hall a couple of weeks ago, and it was like 10:20 and the program ended, and all I could think of was like, thank God I'm just a short cab ride away from home. Like, what if I did live in Staten Island as I threatened to do? I'd sleep in the I guess I'd sleep in the subway and the ferry.
There.
Yeah.
But they have plenty of good delis.
It's getting there late at night that I guess that's the thing that makes us so provincial. But Geoff, it's always interesting to learn about data, and we're going to have you back again soon.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Geoff.